Welcome to Lunch with the Core. Today's speaker is Davidson. He has been managing the CNRG group at IGB since before IGB even wasn't, not only wasn't before a building was here, it was before they started digging the hole. So, so he's responsible for the networking and computing capabilities.
Thanks everybody for being here. This is already more people than I expected, so that's a good thing. I think data management is one of the things that is most lacking in the IGB. So I'm really excited about trying to make a push to help equip everybody with more tools to manage their data more effectively and to keep their data more safe and secure. Before I really get into it today, I also wanted to mention to everybody that we are in the middle of upgrading BioCluster. That's our high performance computing instrument here in the building, from BioCluster version 2 to BioCluster version 3. I know that's a very unique naming system. But if you're interested in moving you and or your group to BioCluster 3 now, we're open to anybody who wants to make that step right now. And actually in the next few weeks, we're going to be contacting groups to schedule those transitions. So if you want to get in the front of the line, you're running out of time to get into the front of the line. With that, I'll go ahead and get started. So where are we now and what are the problems that we have? So just some questions to ask yourselves. So if you had to find a piece of data, could you do that yourself? So if you needed to find, say, a piece of data from an experiment that was run 6 months ago, do you know where it is? More importantly, if you leave to take another job someplace else, does your PI know where that is? Can your PI find your data after you leave? I have several horror stories. We've had to rebuild backup systems that we have already decommissioned and started throwing away parts of to recover files. So I know this stuff happens. Maybe not all the time, but too often. How many copies of your important data exist? Do you have one copy? Do you have it in your home folder? Do you have it in your own box.net folder? Is it in a group folder that everybody else that everybody in your lab can get? Do you have it archived anywhere? It's very important to have more than one copy. Actually, I will argue today that you need 3 copies of anything that's important of your data laying around. Are you here to do IT or are you here to do research? That's one of the questions that I have heard from researchers on campus, that they are frustrated with the fact that they're doing more information technology type work. As in, designing like how stuff is stored and where and how, and instead of really like getting into the science. And the data management plans that your lab has, do those describe exactly what will happen to data and when? Or are they kind of like, we've got a place where we can put data, we'll put it there, we'll organize it somehow at some point in time, and then it'll stay there until we decide we're done with it? Or does it like say, we're going to acquire this data, it's going to go to this system, we're going to analyze it on this next system, and then we're done, we're going to archive it here, and if we publish it, then we also put it on this other system. We're looking at maybe trying to get more layers of specificity in here. If you have to create a data management plan for a grant or anything else, is it easy, or does it take days? Do you have to send many emails to get it done? And then also, are there any mechanisms to make sure that the data management plans are followed once they are done? I know I've written several data management plans, and I know that by going back and looking at where stuff is supposed to be on many of those data management plans, none of that data is where we said it was going to be put. So the question is that data being acquired in the first place, or is it being stored someplace it probably shouldn't be stored? So as a solution, we're proposing creating a new group called Data. And this is not a great name in my opinion, but it's the best one I have right now. If you have any better suggestions, I would love to hear them. But Data, we have it standing for Data Storage, Analysis, Transfer, and Accounting. And we're trying to make this like the plan as when you make a data management plan, that's what it contains. Where you're going to store the data, where you're going to analyze it, how you're going to transfer it from one place to another, and then accounting. And accounting is, making sure only the right people can access it and making sure that the data is stored in the right locations. So data is a new initiative here. It's brand new. Literally, we've done almost nothing yet, so we're really starting to get it off the ground. We have one lab that we're working with to help organize their data. They're kind of our guinea pig. We're trying to ensure that data is safe and sound. There's a lot of haphazardness whenever it comes to data management. I heard from somebody today when I was asking about some data they had on the cluster, and their response was, yeah, we're looking to publish this, so we want to leave it. We want to leave this data in this location for now, but that's the only location they have this data. They don't have it backed up anywhere. They don't have it archived anywhere, and they're not entirely sure how they're going to share it if they do publish it. And that's a problem because literally you are a couple of bad commands, wrong keystrokes, or some disks failing in an inopportune manner on the cluster to losing it all. And if you're just getting ready to publish it, that's a bad place to be. We're also trying to bring new hardware and software technologies to research. How many people have ever heard of something called HDF before? Just a show of hands. So there's not many, but HDF, if you have a lot of small data, say like if you're you have a weather station and you're periodically getting like some weather data off of it, things like air, like the barometric pressure, the temperature, the humidity, if it's raining, how much it's rained. HDF might be a better way to store that. Or if you have an image and you're gathering using some machine learning on that image to determine, where certain things are and what their orientation is, and you're wanting to save that, HDF might be a better way to do that. And if you don't know what that technology is, and HDF isn't even really new anymore, then you're unable to leverage it, and that can really help your research out a lot. We're looking at helping create data management plans. Auditing them to make sure that they're followed. I mentioned earlier that's a significant problem. We also want to make data management a crown jewel of the IGB. I'd say a couple of times a year I get faculty who call me up and the conversation goes, "Can you tell me where my data is?" And I'm like, I don't know where your data is. I've got some ideas. It could be on our cluster, it could be on our file server, it could be on Glenn's core server, but it could be in a number of different places. And what we want to do is we want to make it so that our faculty easily know where their data is so that if they are ever asked for it, they can find it, or at least make somebody else find it. We're also looking at using all available campus resources to get the best solution. We aren't just going to be recommending IGB resources. That's part of what we hope to do, but that's not all of what we hope to do. We see the resources provided at the IGB as being complementary to campus resources and not as in competition with campus resources. So now that we've talked about it, a disclaimer again before we get started. This is all very early. This is literally the first time I've given this presentation to people outside of my group. So we're really looking for feedback. If you have questions, suggestions, we would love to hear them. And almost everything I'm about ready to tell you will change. So this is just our starting point. So the idea that we have is we want to create what we're calling a playbook. And the playbook will be full of different plays that describe different types of data sources. So for instance, all of Glenn's microscopes would be different data sources, and they would all have a play associated with them. And that would be combined together with analysis systems like BioCluster or even your own computer or cloud resources to make a comprehensive play. So there would be like different parts of a play that would mesh together, and then you could take multiple of these plays that you mash together to get yourself a data management plan. We want to make it have multiple levels of detail. So that way, junior researchers, if you're like, okay, I'm going to acquire this data off the microscope, and then I'm going to put it on the core server, then I'm going to copy it off of the files off to the file server and delete it there. Then I'm going to analyze it on the cluster. Then I'm going to copy the analysis back to the file server, and so on and so forth. So that way, you don't have to figure out what the next step is in order to make sure your data is safe every step along the way. We want to be able to give you something that's very precise. Whereas the PIs probably don't want that much information. They just want to know that, hey, the final results are all going to be stored in this place. If I ever need to find anything, it's probably going to be there. So we're looking at getting those multiple levels of detail in place so that the right people get the right amount of information and they don't get bogged down into anything they don't need. We also want to make costs predictable. The number of grants that we see that come along where they decide that storing something on a high-performance system is going to be super cheap, and then they find out it's not super cheap, is quite high. We want to try and prevent that from being an issue. We're trying to be involved we want to be involved all the way from the proposal creation and submission stage all the way through the grant ending and making sure that the data is safe and in the right and organized properly the whole way. And then we also want to help identify where things are going wrong. For instance, if somebody's supposed to be acquiring, a terabyte of data a month, and then we can look at it, we can be like, okay, this person's not acquiring a data at a terabyte a month. That's a good early warning on a grant that maybe something's not going right here. Maybe they're storing their data in the wrong place, but maybe there's been a problem with the microscope and they can't do the research for whatever reason. And that gives the PI a little extra early warning of what might be going on. So talking about what is in a play, where the data resides primarily, how it is stored, and that's the format. Are you storing stuff as if you're collecting images? Are you storing it as a Zeiss image? Are you storing it as a TIFF? Are you storing it as a JPEG? Those are all important parts that need to be known beforehand, and we also need to standardize on that before you really start collecting your data. How long is it going to reside on those different sources? How will it be analyzed? Where are the backup copies? Who's responsible for it? Your PI is always primarily responsible for the data, but I understand that that responsibility just gets delegated down. Who's the delegated person who's responsible for the data? How much does it cost to store it? How much does it cost to analyze it? How do we recover from a disaster? Just this last week, we had a problem with our file server that most of you probably received an email about, and we were able to recover the data from it and get it back. But that if that were something similar were to happen to BioCluster, that data is gone. The data on BioCluster is not backed up. So it's important for everybody to know how you would recover from a disaster there. And then what happens when the funding ends? Say you collected 100 terabytes of data over the course of over the course of a project. And the funding for that grant runs out. What are you going to do with that 100 terabytes of data? Granting agencies usually require you to keep that data for 5, 7, or 10 years, one of those three options, to be available in case people ask questions about it or want to see it. If you don't have funding for it anymore, how do you keep it around for that period of time? So that's all what's going to be part of the play. So I started doing this by accident a little earlier, but here's kind of an example of a play. So images are acquired and placed on the core facility server temporarily. You then copy that data off of the core facility server and you place it on the IGB file server. That's where your primary copy is going to be located. As a backup, for a third copy, you also put it in a group folder that's in box.net. So now you have essentially 3 copies of your data. And you're like, what are you talking about? That's only 2. Well, you have a copy on the file server. The file server is also backed up daily, so that's 2 copies of your data by just putting it on the file server. And then putting a copy in the box.net, that's your third option. So your data in this circumstance is extremely safe because you have 3 copies of your data that eventually will be in 3 different locations because all of our backup tapes are sent to an offsite storage facility in Rantoul. So if a tornado came through here and destroyed the building, you would still be able to get that data back eventually. Moving on to get to the analysis portion of it. As needed, data is copied to BioCluster and analyzed there. The analysis is then copied back over to the file server in box.net. So you again have 3 copies of the results of the analysis. You then remove the data and results from BioCluster. BioCluster is not meant to hold data for the long term. It's only meant to hold data temporarily while analysis is being performed on it. If you have data that's important long term, that needs to be either on the file server or on the archive. And then when complete, you tar gzip all the files together into one big file and you put it on BioArchive. And then if you publish it, you then you copy that exact same tarball to the Illinois Databank for sharing. The Illinois Databank is a U of I resource, and if you put your data on there, it keeps it there for, I think, 5 or 7 years. And it's basically, it gives you a URL, and if anybody wants to download it, they can download it from there. And then finally, remove the data from box.net and the file server since you've archived it and put it in the Illinois Databank. One of the things I want to start warning people is there are rumblings that box.net at some point in time in the future, probably not this year, maybe even probably not next year, but sometime soonish, box.net is not going to be free anymore. If you have terabytes of data in box.net, somebody will have to start picking up part of that cost at some point in time. So what we're trying to do is predict that a little bit and to try to give people some clarity as to what might be happening. And a lot of that is if you don't need anything on there still, just take it off. If you've already got it archived, you've already got it shared publicly, there's no reason to keep it in box.net anymore. So that's kind of how we're looking at a play. Like I said, this is going to change and probably have to be modified for everybody's specific research a little bit. I imagine not everybody needs to analyze their stuff on BioCluster, but this is why we say like there's going to be different sections of a play that get meshed together. We want to have different options for the analysis location, different options for where you store the data, and so on. All right. Looking at what resources are used, we're planning on using everything. The IGB file server, BioCluster, BioArchive, private storage systems in the IGB. These are systems that your PI owns that you put data on. Box.net, Amazon, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure. NCSA Delta, that's the machine that just replaced Blue Waters. Carney, which is the Campus Research Network, and that is a horrible name, but that's the one they chose. Illinois Databank for sharing, Campus Cluster, IGB backups. We want to use all the resources that we have available in making these plans. So current progress. Right now, we're getting the word out. We're here. We're talking to people about it. We're putting together initial plays. We're going to be working with Glenn Moore Glenn doesn't really know about this yet. We're going to be talking with Glenn more about this at some point in time in the near future to start coming up with plays for his microscopes. We're also working with another group, Andrew Leakey's people. If any of you are here, you've probably seen that you now have a group box.net folder. That's the first step of us working with him to help get this off the ground and to organize his data a little better. So primarily right now what we're looking at is moving people into group folders instead of shared folders. You'll start, if you have data that's in your own folder on the file server or on the cluster, within the next year you'll be getting emails saying, hey, you have what looks to be an unusually large amount of data in your home folder. Let's try to move this data out to a group folder so that it's shared properly amongst your group and is accessible by your PI. Same thing with on the file server. With the trouble that we had on the file server, the one thing that we noticed is really the area that we had a problem with, nobody should have cared, and we had a handful of people who cared. So that's kind of a red flag that stuff might not be used the way it was designed. But we want to get these 3-2-1 backup plans. If you don't know what a 3-2-1 backup plan is, that's 3 copies of all your data that's important, stored in 2 different places, one of which is in a different location. So that different location, we do that by usually through the offsite tape storage facility in Rantoul. There's also a little bit that happens between the IGB and the CBC server room, a little bit that, but that's what we're looking for. And then we want to encourage people to use the Illinois Data Bank for publishing their results. That's a public resource to campus. It's not being used the way it probably needs to be used. That's a primary push that we have. We also have some general service descriptions to help with writing data management plans. This is kind of like us trying to get stuff off the ground by just putting the information in a location that people can refer to. We're hoping to have something better in the future, but that's an easy way to get started. Next steps, I'm working on an NSF grant to get this off the ground. And then sometime in the next few months, we're going to be hiring somebody new who can help with the creation of these plays, help assemble the data management plans, and then audit the data management plans for compliance. We really need help with it. I'm trying to get this off the ground by myself right now, and it's a lot of work. So we really need one other person. And then once we start getting the IGB covered and the core facilities covered, what we want to do is we want to start expanding our playbook. Maybe looking at stuff, outside of what the IGB does. Maybe we start adding plays from engineering, from chemistry, maybe from psychology, so that we kind of start increasing what's available. Because our ultimate goal for this is we want to make this something that becomes a service for the whole campus to use. That might be a too big of a goal, but that's kind of what we're shooting for right now. And then we're also looking at reaching out to faculty, to new faculty. We've had a lot of people arrive over the last 2 years, and because everybody's been hiding in their office to keep from getting COVID, we haven't met a lot of people. There's a lot of new faces in here that I haven't seen before. And I'm your IT director, so you should know who I am. We're going to be looking at trying to visit each theme for a meeting to talk about our services and about this initiative. And then we also want to develop theme contacts for data management. PIs are usually too busy to be involved with this type of stuff, but if we can find somebody in each theme or in each lab who's interested and is willing to work with us on this, that will very much help us get the labs up to speed. One other thing that I wanted to add in here that I think I've missed over, that I've skipped over while talking about everything today, is that the requirements for data management plans are becoming much more strict going forward. NIH has a lot more strict specifications that go into effect in January. So pretty much any grant that's being worked on right now is going to have a lot more specifics about their data than what they've had to have previously. I've heard rumblings that NSF and DOE are doing the same thing. We're also seeing more requests for more detail in private donations as well, because they kind of pick up their cues from the big granting agencies. So this is something that we're going to have to be working on together and doing a better job of. And we are really just trying to get this off the ground as quickly as possible, so that nobody's caught flat-footed when these more stringent requirements get in place. A little further down the road, we want to create a web tool to create these data management plans to try to streamline it a little bit. We would like to make it so faculty could create a data management plan in under 15 minutes to maybe even half an hour if it's a bigger one. We just want to make it easy, where there's kind of like drop-down menus, and it's plug-in, and it's very much almost a drag-and-drop type thing, where you take different things and you mash them together, and that creates the plan for you. I know that's not very much detail, but that's something that we're interested in doing. We really want to make sure that everybody's using the right resource for the job. There's a lot of wrong resources being used for the job right now. A lot of things being done very inefficiently, and we would just like to help everybody with that. And also new technologies. Things change every day, and we just want to keep research on the cutting edge. Lastly, we're looking at creating data management tools. Modify older useless data for removal. BioCluster right now has about 700 terabytes of data on it. And we know for a fact that 500 terabytes of this data has not been used in the last year. And everybody's paying $8 a month for these 500 terabytes of data that have not been used in the last year. Which is great for us. We're getting a lot of money. But it's also not great that, in general, this is the only copy of that data that exists. It's not backed up. It's just one copy of the data. And it's kind of been abandoned. It needs to be moved someplace else that is more secure. So that's one of the things that we're looking for doing, is identifying this old data. The file server is even worse. We have data on the file server that hasn't been touched since 2005, when I fired it up for the first time. We want to try to start, figuring out what we're going to do with this old data. Again, we want to get 3-to-1 backup plans in place for all data, so that if something goes wrong, you don't lose it. And then again, identifying where new technologies can help improve workflows. I know I have talked a lot. I know I have talked fast, because I wanted to leave time for questions at the end. And that's where I am. And I will walk away from the microphone here and grab my notebook. And if anybody has any questions or suggestions, I would love to hear them. Gloria. So how much are we going to charge for this? Okay. Right now, we're not charging anything for it, because we're just trying to take care of the data we have. We're hoping to get a grant to cover the charges, the cost to get this up and off the ground. The one I'm working on right now would be a 3-year grant that would kind of take care of all the costs involved. That said, long term, what we're looking at is coming up with a percentage based upon the size of a grant that we have, that we could use to offset the time that's needed to do this. Just throwing out a number, say if you have a $1 million a year grant, maybe we charge 5% of a full-time employee to that grant, and that's what we use to do the auditing and the data management stuff for them. Yeah, Gloria still?
Yes, the people that have a data management plan, but don't have data projects and so on and so forth. Can they still get services?
So that's the idea of this, one of the reasons we're trying to get a grant to get this off the ground. We know that there's a lot of data that we have right now that's not covered by a plan. What we're trying to do is make it so where the data is all covered by the plan in these first 3 years. So in essence, that's a 4-year from now problem. But we want to make it so that when people think about acquiring data, that they also think about managing it at the exact same time. You know, it's one thing to acquire a Ferrari, it's another thing to take care of it. And it's kind of the same thing with data. If you're going to buy something, you go out and you spend money to acquire data, you want to be able to take care of it. You know, you want to make sure you have insurance on it and whatever. You know, and that's what we're trying to do with these backup plans. Chris?
Data privacy.
Data privacy. So, permissions are one of the things that we want to include with this auditing to make sure that the right people have access to the data. One of the issues that we have identified in the building is we have no real way of identifying when somebody has left. Because people leave, and whenever you all came here, you had to submit money to like get a key or whatever. And the number of people who just leave without getting their key deposit back is extremely high. I know that there's thousands of dollars in the key fund now that nobody can access because in theory they could come back and drop off their keys and pick up their $20 or whatever. So what we're hoping is that by doing, you know, a 6-month or a yearly audit, that we can talk with the PIs and we can be like, okay, first step is who's still in your group, and kind of start from there and making sure that the right people have access to it. And we also want to make sure that data is being shared appropriately. You know, you don't want to write a grant that basically says we're going to acquire health information from a bunch of people and then we're just going to throw it on a website. We want to make sure that we're thinking about things the right way with that stuff. That answer your question?
Yeah, I was also kind of getting to the, you kind of came around to the end about health data and data security. And
Oh, yeah.
deal with certain types of data which we can't use in the cluster.
Yeah. So for instance, HIPAA data, this is a great point. Like HIPAA data is not allowed on our cluster. Every time you log in, you see in the banner that says HIPAA data is not allowed on the cluster. There's a cluster on campus for that. And like that's an area where we're just not going to compete with campus on it. They've spent millions of dollars to create a health and safety thing for campus, and that's what they're going to use. It's the same as we don't compete with Blue Waters, and we aren't going to compete with Delta. You know, those big NCSA systems are for a reason, and we're not. That's not what we're here for. We're here to teach and help people use resources on a smaller scale that are maybe a little more tailored to their needs than what these bigger pieces of iron systems can do. Anybody else have a question? Yes? Awesome. So on the C drive level, Austin, I'm afraid you're out of luck. We don't want to go quite down that far. But like in terms of the core server, like for those of you that don't know, the core server is quite full, and it should not be quite full because that data should only be there temporarily until you move it to the next location that it should be in. That definitely would be part of it, is we would want to include that. And that goes into those tools that we were talking about. like identifying old or useless data for removal. Like we would want to run something on the core server every so often and basically look for files over a year old. And if there were files over a year old, we would want to draw that to people's attention and try to move those along. Yeah. Any other questions? Suggestions? I've been low on the suggestion side. I was hoping to get some suggestions.
You had mentioned at one point that you were working with a few researchers on possibly implementing some more technical, I guess, more tools that you could use for managing data like iRods. Is that still
So
something?
we haven't gone down the iRods rabbit hole yet. That is on the table. I'm anxious to see what people want. If people don't want iRods, I don't want to build an iRod system because it's a lot of work, and if no one's going to use the features that it has, then kind of what's the point? But if people want it, that's definitely something we want to build as part of this. Yes, Dave?
I was wondering to what extent this can all be automated. It sounds like right now there's a lot of discussion and
Yeah.
identifying the items and so on.
So it is very manual right now because we're trying to get it off the ground. The audits, in theory, once we get the tools created, those can just happen every 6 months and be sent out. And then you're still going to need to have somebody sitting around making sure people like follow through on what they're supposed to do. But beyond that, we're really hoping that we can automate a lot of it. We still need somebody to write the tools and then to do that following up though. Which is kind of going to be that new hire's primary job, is writing the tools and following up with people.
So when it gets all built out like you are imagining,
Mm-hmm.
what would a lab have to do?
So, in theory, a lab is, you have a data management, think of it as a per research project type thing. That's kind of how I'm envisioning it instead of a per lab type thing. So you look at a research project, you look at, in theory, whatever that proposal was created, we make a data management plan for it. And then from there, it's just part of the workflow every step along the way. The data management plan exists. We find out that the grant's funded. We probably have a kickoff meeting to talk to everybody and remind everybody what's supposed to be going on and what's supposed to be done. And then after that, every 6 months, there's maybe a 1 hour meeting that gets scheduled where we talk about, the status of everything and see where things are. Maybe a little more often if we're seeing that people aren't, following following through on their commitments. We do that a little more to hold people to the fire a little bit. But in theory, we want it to be easy and simple. We don't want to add to everybody's burden. What we want to do is we want to free people up to do research. Because that's what most people came here for, is you came here to do research, not to figure out where you should save stuff. Yes? Not Chris, but yeah.
So this sounds great for the data, but have you thought about providing researchers tools to capture the analysis they do? So in my work, I have a lot of Python tools that I've written up to do the analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm worried that, when I graduate, I can pass on the tool, but might not be completely smooth sailing to the next grad student to get it working.
So the way I view that is that's just a different data source. And so like programming data is just a different data source as compared. So essentially you're the microscope in this situation. You're generating the data through your programming. And in this instance, like there's an IGB GitHub page, and if you have a GitHub repo in that page, then whenever you do leave and go do something else, then that data should still be around for the IGB to use. Whenever it comes to programming, one of the things that we're also interested in doing is trying to come up with I don't know really the way to describe it, but like a plan for sustainability of a programming project. So you're writing code, but who's going to take over that code? Who's going to take over that code next? Or is it going to be abandoned? Or is it going to be abandoned and because that research project doesn't exist anymore? That type of question is one of the things that we want to make sure people are asking and working on.
I was going to ask, so how will you deal with training researchers for kind of getting into the habit of?
Again, new person that we're going to hire's job. We would be probably doing very similar to our how to use biocluster classes. Classes on how to use this stuff. We want to make it so easy that you really don't have to like be trained on how to use like that web tool to create a data management plan. But yeah, we would have like training classes every so often where people would be able to come and we could talk to them about this stuff. Alvaro?
So, I think it's a great idea, and as you know, we post a lot of data, and sometimes we have people that don't know the data,
Mm-hmm.
that the postdoc does know the data, and the postdoc leaves, and then went the data, and let's help us find it, but it's a huge challenge.
Yep.
I wonder, this is so important, I wonder if you guys have to go to a campus level, and every faculty has to have a data management plan.
That's kind of the big goal. We're starting small with a couple of labs, and then we're going to get bigger, trying to get to all of the IGB, and then kind of the long-term goals is we want to expand beyond just the research that's at the IGB. So life sciences might be the next best area to expand to. Then chemistry might be the next best area to expand to. And then if we keep doing our job and doing it well, before you know it, it becomes huge and self-sustaining, and and it really is a crown jewel for the IGB and by extension campus. That's what, because we recognize that it's not just an IGB problem, and it's also not just a University of Illinois problem. This is a research problem. It exists all across, from no matter how good or how bad your university is, you have this problem wherever you are.
So there's no more questions. There's a little bit more pizza to grab a slice on the way out, and you can ask Dan a few questions.
Yep. I can be here for 10 more minutes.